Welcome back to the Groove Lifting Show. Today, I'm joined by my friend from the internet, Alex Hayes. This is the first time we've ever actually had a proper chat, isn't it?
I know, right? It's funny how that works sometimes. It seems to happen a lot in the powerlifting world. The first time you meet someone who you've known for like 3 years.
Yeah. I've probably known of you a bit longer, to be fair. I reckon I've mentioned this to you before, but big fan of weekly weights back in the day. And I reckon that was, I'll always tell people, I think when I started out coaching, I was doing my exercise science degree at the time, which fucking sucked. Like, I don't care about VO2 max, right? But as soon as, a shoot would finish, I'd go back, get back on the train and head home, which was like an hour commute. And I'd just be smashing like weekly weights from the start. I reckon I completed all the weekly weights in like a 3-month period, just like to and from uni. And I loved it back then. I reckon I got so much of my knowledge from that. So I feel like inherently a lot of our ideas around powerlifting my ideas are probably heavily influenced by shit you guys said, to be fair.
The Berkman said that I just kind of nodded along with
you. Yeah, you sort of facilitated a bit of conversation. Hey, only one of you lasted, so...
It was a good time in the fitness industry because no one had really in Australia tapped into the podcasting market. We were kind of the first one, and then there was the quantum lifting. But yeah, we were like the kind of the first one, and we grew really fast. Like we grew faster than my current podcast has, just because it's so much more saturated now. We had kind of a bit of a leg up, and when we asked people to do podcasts with us, they were really excited because they'd never done one, or they'd done one or two before. So it was good times. Good times.
Yeah. So you have a podcast at the moment called Lift Talk for those lifting. I should probably introduce you. As I was saying to you, I think a lot of my listeners are Melbourne based and perhaps a little bit newer. So I don't think everyone is completely familiar with who you are, but Alex is a coach from Sydney. A powerlifting coach from Sydney who coaches out of City Strength. So when you buy your SBD knee sleeves, it comes from that warehouse there, where there's also a gym. But Alex has been around for ages. When did you get into the sport initially / coaching?
So I actually coached my first powerlifter into a competition before I competed myself.
Really?
I probably wouldn't recommend people doing out there. But I started getting into powerlifting training back in like 2012, but didn't compete until the end of 2014. And because I had done the training in a commercial gym, I was working at Fitness First at the time. I was doing squat, bench, deadlift. Not many people were doing that 12 years ago. It was pretty rare to see people squatting and deadlifting. Obviously, everyone is bench forever and will forever bench. But it was rare to see people squatting and deadlifting heavy in a commercial gym back then, and so I attracted people who wanted to do it as well. So I ended up coaching I think 5 or so people to the platform before I'd ever actually competed. Been coaching powerlifting 11 years now, competing 10 years.
Yep. What I don't expect you to think too hard into it, but what's the most outstanding thing when I ask the question, what's the difference between now and then? What's changed the most?
Oh God. I actually did a full podcast episode on this like a couple months ago with 2 people who've been around about as long as me. Actually, I think the biggest thing is probably just the number of people who do it.
Yeah.
Like back in 2014, there's like 4 comps a year in Sydney, and it's the same people at every comp. There's like 100 powerlifters in Sydney, whereas now there's 10 times the comps. And it's always different people in and out. I would say the biggest thing is probably just the popularity of it. And then there's like a million different things as far as like how coaching is done, what the gyms look like. Gyms back then, there was you couldn't find Alico plates anywhere 10 years ago. Now they're in every single gym in Sydney and in Melbourne as well. So it's changed so much. But yeah, if you want to know the hour-long answer to that show, listen to that episode I did a few months ago.
We'll link it somewhere. Yeah, there's even now like road calibrated plates in like Anytime Fitnesses here. It's like, what the hell?
I went to a Club Lime for a bit when I was rehabbing my shoulder because it was just around the corner and I would like go and do machines and stuff. And one of the coaches there had two Ohio power bars just sitting in the gym.
Yeah, right.
You would never get that back 10 years ago. Like you'd barely get one of them in a powerlifting gym.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Even I've been in the sport probably right on half the time you've been in it, but like I can even notice the same thing. At every comp, there's now just like a bunch of new lifters, and it gets younger and younger, which is obviously a good thing. And popularity of the sport obviously is a great thing for us and the industry. With that popularity, have any negative things come up with an increasing popularity, or maybe not necessarily fully negative, but things you aren't so much a fan of?
I think like with any group of people, there's always going to be a few sour grapes.
Yeah.
Like in any group, if we're like thinking about politics or like fucking any sport or like anything like that, there's always going to be a small percentage of those people who are just cunts. And like I think as the sport grows, there's just more people who try to poison the well and drag everyone else down and just it. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily like indicative of the population getting younger, but it seems to be the younger lifters who are a little bit toxic in that regard. It's hard to say specifically what it is, but like I feel like with more people, the likelihood of someone just acting in a way that you don't like is just a lot higher.
Yeah, fair enough. One thing I've had conversations with people about, and I'm sure you likely notice the same trend in Sydney, but I feel like the average age of a powerlifter or someone that competes in powerlifting seems to almost like, in a lot of instances, get a bit smaller and smaller. Like, I think a lot of people are finding it at a younger age, but there is definitely this like consistent theme of burnout, or I guess kids like achieving too much too soon. Then when that stops, just more likely to quit. Like that's a just general sort of theme I observe. Do you see much of that? And do you think if you do you see much of that?
Yeah, like I think burnout's huge, and I don't think it's just in younger people. I actually think it's in everyone, and I think this is the case for most hobbies. We just see it in our hobby because like we've been around long enough to see the cycles of people come and go. I used to think this was like a huge issue for young people to come in and make heaps of progress and then just fucking smoke bomb and disappear. But now I don't know, I've kind of changed my thoughts on this a little bit. I feel like when you're young, especially as a young male, if you're in your teenage years and early 20s, like the amount of progress you can make in that period of time is actually insane. Like it's crazy how far you can go. So my new kind of opinion is, why would you not take advantage of that? And if you feel like you can outlast that very massive growth and then just continue it steady as you get into your mid-20s or whatever, why wouldn't you do that? Like, why would you take it slower deliberately at the start to be behind other people making more progress? I guess like where this idea comes from is like, we always hear the ones who are the biggest and the strongest are the ones who live the longest. The ones who last the longest. That's what we always hear, right? But like, that's obviously true. But that doesn't mean that you can't make a lot of that progress in a short period of time at the start and then still outlast someone. And I feel like the people who are going to burn out are almost going to burn out anyway. Like it almost doesn't matter if they've pushed themselves too hard or not. Those people usually burn out because they lack interest anymore. Like they lose interest. And I actually think, if anything, progressing slower is less interesting.
Yeah.
So like, I've got a lot of young lifters now who I started coaching when they were 16 and now they're like 19, and they're progressing very fast. I've held them back a little bit, but not as much as I would have in the past. I do think like if you progress too fast, you put yourself at a greater risk of injury than you would if you slowed it down a little bit. Like I think that's quite clear. But yeah, I definitely am not as conservative with that as I would have been in the past. Like I feel like if someone's going to burn out, you can't really do a heap to prevent that as a coach. You almost just have to like let them decide how they want to push themselves along the way.
Yeah, I really like that. I feel like this is the first time someone's articulated it closest to, I guess, my thoughts as well, because to proactively try and like slow down training and in turn like maybe make the experience of training less enjoyable for someone is just going to shoot yourself in the foot, because like the whole thing that someone needs to enjoy training to actually stay in it a long period of time to begin with. And you're so right, like those people that will burn out and leave, they're going to do that anyway. I think people forget, or maybe perhaps coaches forget, like for us it's our whole life, but for other people this powerlifting may only be something that they do for a few years, like any other hobby. Like not everyone takes on hobbies and does them for the rest of their life. And I hate it when I think coaches are too like protective of that long-term view. You're right. And like if someone is around longer enough, for long enough, that's when they're probably more likely to run into things like injuries or plateaus or things that slow them down, that force them to have that, I guess, long-term view. But
I also think like those kind of people who actually want to go as far as you can in powerlifting, you have to push yourself as hard as you can and also last as long as you can to get to the top.
Yeah.
Like if you look at all the people who are at the top at now, like look at Sheffield, for instance, they've all been in this for 6+ years and they've all been pushing themselves fucking hard the entire time. Like there hasn't been a time where they take the foot off the gas outside of like a few weeks after competition or they go on holidays or something like that. It's always all gas, no brakes. And if you actually do want to be at that level and you do have the genetics that are required to get you to that level, like you can't really just cruise through and take the piss. Like you actually do have to fucking go hard.
Yeah.
You have to.
I asked you to bring in a hot take for our chat today.
I've got two.
Perfect.
Because you asked for one that was training related. Well, you said training or non-training related, so I took that to mean do one training related and do one non-training related.
Yeah.
So I'll do my training related one first. So this is like a coaching take.
Mm-hmm.
As a coach, understanding psychology is more important than understanding physiology.
100%. I love it. Well, it's not hot to me, but it probably is hot to a lot of people. Would you like to elaborate on it?
I feel like you can take someone further with a greater understanding of sort of just people skills and getting to know people and like building rapport and relationships, building trust and buy-in.
Yep.
Those things are actually what takes someone to the next level and what gets someone to push themselves the way that you want to, rather than having a good understanding of anatomy and programming, physiology, blah, blah, blah. Like obviously we want to understand those things to a certain degree. Like there's a certain threshold that we have to cross, otherwise we're not ticking enough of those boxes. But if you really want to take someone to the next level, psychology is how you do it.
Yeah. One thing I really like to talk a lot about is the importance of adherence, and like we obviously understanding adhering to a training program is a necessity, but not just adherence of getting all the exercises done, but adherence in like how well you can approach all of your exercises. And one thing I really like to think about is like how can you change lifters' attitude towards a program through programming. And it's like, how can you get the ultimate buy-in? How can you make lifter feel like they're making decisions? Like, how can you make them feel like they're getting the most out of their training so they bring the most to their training? Through program design in particular, I really like to unpack. And it relates exactly to what you're saying, which is doesn't necessarily matter what's on the program every single time, but it's how well that can be completed. And that again comes from how the athlete's approaching it and like mentally, really.
Yeah, I think as you learn more about someone and you ask more and more questions, the individualization of the program becomes the psychology of the athlete way more so than the physiology of the athlete. Like the decisions that you make to select certain accessories, select certain secondaries, select like rep ranges and stuff like that. In my opinion, that stuff is decided by the answers that I get from my clients when I ask questions. And the more information that I learn about them, that's how I decide what decisions to make, like to their actual program. And like one of the things that I do is I will have like probably 20% of the program that changes very little, which is the what I would consider the stuff that's compulsory. So like if you're competing in powerlifting, squat, bench, deadlift. And then outside of that, a lot of the stuff is going to be personal preference or stuff that the athlete has buy-in that they think has worked for them before. Even if you don't even think that it's worked for them before, even if physiologically you can't explain why it might have worked, if they think that it's worked for them in the past, you would be fucking stupid to not put in their program.
Yeah.
And I actually ask my clients like, hey, okay, you've got your main squat. Afterwards, we're going to do, some sort of squatting accessory work. Here's 4 options. Pick one. You can do a belt squat, a pendulum squat. You could do a lunge, or you could do something else. Like pick one that you like, pick one that excites you. I'll often ask my clients like, what's in your program that you're dreading at the moment? What are you not looking forward to doing? Fuck, we'll change it. Unless it's one of those compulsory things, we'll change it. Change it to something else. And if you can get someone looking forward to every single slot in their program, you're winning like all the time because you're going to tick boxes. They're going to work harder. And it may seem like a little bit if someone works 5% harder each session and completes things 5% better. But that stuff snowballs. It's like compounding interest. Like if you do that 4 sessions a week, 5% better, and you do that for a block, and you do that for another block, like the difference between athlete A and athlete B, it starts like this, and then they both grow, and this one just continues to grow faster and faster. Like this other athlete is still growing and improving, but the speed at which they're improving is not at all like the other one.
Yeah. Is this something that you didn't always, I guess, take into consideration? Like, did you used to be a bit more rigid with your approach and like you've come to this conclusion through observation or?
I feel like I've always had a pretty good grasp on reading people. My mum's a psychologist, which I think might help. It might be genetic. And I played sport at a high level and I was always in like a leadership position, like in a captaincy role or like coaching. When I finished school, I would coach basketball and rugby. So I feel like I learned this stuff before powerlifting, and it just kind of figured out how to carry it through to powerlifting. I definitely have had periods in my time where it's been like, this is the program, do as coach says, like more of a dictatorship type style. Yeah. But I always come back to, giving the athlete a voice, giving them some decision making. It also empowers them to feel like they have the ability to make decisions, which I think is really helpful as well. It empowers them to go, okay, I'm not enjoying this. I'm actually going to tell Alex because I know that he's going to do something about it. He's going to try and get me to enjoy things again. So yeah, I've definitely gone like a little bit towards the dictator realm and then come back. And I always end up swinging back to sort of this take.
Yeah. No, I love it.
I don't even know if it's a hot take. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like too many coaches are always doing the next course. They're always finding out about the next programming strategy. They're always reading about fucking whatever. And they're missing a lot of details in front of them because they're focused elsewhere. But if you really want to be a good coach, you need to listen to your client and you need to be very present when they're talking and you need to be like really aware of what's going on because you're going to impact stuff in a really simple way just by collecting that information.
Yeah. No, that was good. I liked it. What have you got for a non-training related hot take?
Okay, so I have heaps of like takes about food,
Yeah.
and this might be my least popular one because I feel like the fitness industry has scammed us into thinking that this is a good food for, I mean, it is a healthy food, but it sucks and it's oats.
Yeah.
Oats absolutely suck. They're not good. They don't taste good. The texture sucks. The only way that people make oats good, like so many people are like, oh, I had oats for breakfast, and I'm like, oh, great. And I've just put heaps of Nutella in and fruit and all this stuff that actually tastes good. And I'm like, you don't like
Yeah.
oats.
Yeah.
You like Nutella and fruit, which is fine. Like Nutella and fruit's delicious. But I feel like we've been tricked by the fitness industry that this was the best breakfast choice, like from years and years ago. This is what you eat in the morning because it's low GI. It's going to keep you full for longer. And we've actually just bought into this idea that oats are good when oats are just horrendous.
I don't like oats either. All I'm learning is that we're really similar. Cool, cool. Thanks for bringing those in. Um, we both had a big weekend. You ran the Sydney version of Victorian States, I believe.
No, you had Victorian states.
Oh, right. No, but the SBD Cup was over the weekend. One of the big things I wanted to chat to you about, which is a competition that was run in the APA over the weekend. And I guess the first of its kind in Australia, I believe. I guess a similar sort of idea to Sheffield, where lifters were invited. So the best lifters were invited, and the name of the game was basically to try and beat the total record within your weight class, which would give you a percentage score, and that was how winners were determined. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, so invitational competition, best lifters in the country in varying weight classes, and they're all competing to see who can break the total record by the greatest amount, essentially. So, um, yeah, your score is basically your percentage of your total onto the Australian record. So if the total record is 500 kilos and you did 550 kilos, your score would be 110. And that would beat someone who did, with a total record of 400. If they did 435, they would be less than 110. You would beat that person. So the idea of the comp is it's an exhibition. So we want to see some sick lifting. We want to see all the best lifters in one place. But it's also a record-breaking comp. Like that's kind of the whole purpose of the comp, is that we want to see lifts that haven't been attempted before. We want to see who can push the records by the most. And yeah, that's kind of the premise. It is exactly Australian Sheffield. Was our vision from the start, was to just sort of piggyback off what they did at Sheffield and create our own version of it. And I think we did a really, really good job. You said I ran the comp. I definitely didn't run the comp. I was just behind the scenes, like with several of the ideas. And I helped with the selections. I helped with a lot of the finer details behind the scenes, but I wasn't the meet director or anything like that. That was John and Greta.
Yep. Speaking of selections, when did selections happen?
So it was actually a little bit rushed this year because APA only just formed sort of at the tail end of last year, and we sort of had this idea, but we were a little bit slow getting to it because all of us who were helping run the comp were also very involved in APA and getting it all up and running, and then getting nationals up and running, and then running a couple of local meets here and stuff. And we weren't too concerned with organising this because it was like further down the track. So I think we send out our first invites in the middle of June, actually, which we'll definitely be doing earlier next year. And the selection criteria was a bit grey area. Like it was very difficult to pin down like a defined criteria. which I think we've done now. I can explain that a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But what we wanted, and this was kind of what I helped with the most, was trying to strike a balance between lifters who scored well in like a good lift or DOTS formula, and then also lifters who were close to the record or very competitive within their class as well. So we didn't want a lifter to come in a weight class that had a low total because they weren't competitive relative. So we would prefer someone in that class to come from a class with a bit more depth. So there was a little bit of like juggling going on between what we looked at and what we kind of ignored, which was quite difficult at the start. So we created a bit of a list and we invited the best 12 women, the best 12 men, and most people in the first round accepted their invites, and then we went back for a second round and we just went further down the list and invited more. And I think we got 24 out of the, I think, first 35 that we invited, which is a pretty good strike rate. We then had a couple pull out, so we had to fill them, and then we ended up actually one woman short, so we only had 11 women compete on the day because we had someone pull out quite late, and it was a bit late to replace her, so we just left it at 11.
Do you suspect, what were some reasons for people not taking the taking up the invite?
So most people who said no had just done Worlds.
Okay.
And like I think it was like a 12 or 13 week turnaround from Worlds, and it was also a 12 or 13 week turnaround from Nationals. So it's essentially 3 meets back to back, and then it's another like 16 weeks until the next Nationals. So it's essentially committing to 4 meets in a row. And I can understand why people wouldn't want to do that. It's pretty tough to just back to back to back. And you know, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier with burnout. Like this is a way where you can actually prevent burnout. So absolutely no issue with people turning it down. For that reason, there was one woman who just did Worlds, but then is also just quitting powerlifting. There was another guy who's injured. There was another guy who had knee surgery. So like just the reasons that you would think.
Yeah.
But our goal for next year is to get a much higher strike rate on those invites. And I think we showed proof of concept now that this meet is something that people want to be at. There was a few people who we invited who were actually here. So Shay Zaru, she accepted her invite and then turned it down. She ended up head reffing. So she was here and she had a great time. 2 of the other lifters were in the spotting and loading team. And, you know, I spoke to them both after and they're like, you know, we're not turning this down next year. And another one of the guys was out the back coaching and he was like, fuck, I wish I did it. So yeah. I think we showed that this is a really exciting event and it's almost like a one of its kind in Australia. And yeah, it was actually unreal.
Is there anything, do you think you can position it better in the calendar to improve strike rate? Is that something you think about at all?
I think where it's placed is actually perfect because it's halfway between Worlds and Nationals. So if it was any further earlier, it would be too close to Worlds, so we wouldn't get those athletes. And if it was any later, it would be too close to Nationals and we would actually probably get less athletes. Like if we had it in December and then Nationals is in late Feb, like we'd probably get almost no one wanting to do both.
Yeah.
So I think where it's placed is actually okay. But the other thing is that with the way the APA is set up now, in order to qualify for Nationals, this meet would qualify you, so would Worlds, and then you wouldn't have to do another one. So the people who did Nationals earlier this year had previously done state championships with APU. So they were already like another meet in the books, and then they had to do a local comp to qualify for state champs. So this was like the 5th, and then Nationals would have been the 6th. So like it's pretty tough to do that many meets, like 4 meets a year as a high level lifter is like very, very tough. So not at all surprised that we had so many lifters turn it down, but I'm pretty confident that next year will be a lot better.
You hinted just before that you might have a bit more of a robust selection criteria for next year. Is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, so I'm still working on it. I can give you the details now. I spoke about this on one of my more recent podcasts as well. But essentially I'm creating a ranking system using the lifters' percentage of total record combined with their good lift score to create a third score, which we're calling the Hayes score. 'Cause I made it, so it's mine.
Yeah.
So the reason I like this is because obviously 100% is the highest you can score, unless you're going over. But once the record, is legitimate, you're at 100%. That's the highest you can get on that one. And then a really good lift score is 100. I think the best in Australia right now is Nathan Tannis at 115. So
Did you get an invite? Quick question.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
Okay.
he didn't want to do back-to-back preps, and I think he's actually injured at the moment. So, yeah, good decision. Yeah, he was the top of my list.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I'll actually do to bring the good lift down a little bit, I'll put like a 90% weighting on the good lift score, just to bring the weighting down a little bit on that, so that it's about 50-50 for each of those two categories. And then we end up with a ranking system that kind of takes into account both those things really well. So that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment, is figuring out that ranking system for next year. Yep. Let's go.
Along those lines of, I guess, so you're going to make some adjustments to the selection criteria. Are there any other early ideas or thoughts of how the competition, although it's already seems like an amazing comp, can get better over time?
So the selection criteria itself won't really change. This is just giving us like a way to actually quantify the list rather than kind of just going off vibes, which is kind of what I did.
Yeah.
Like I had a list, I had a list that was kind of like objective, but there wasn't any specific rules in place, so it made it a little bit murky at times.
Do you ever consider, I'm sure there's a reason for, but the Sheffield criteria is what, like if you win Worlds, it's instant qualification, and then it's wildcards, is that right?
If you win Worlds, you still have to hit 95% of the record to be invited.
Yeah.
The reason I don't like that is because some records just aren't that good. So if the record is low and someone like just beats it at nationals or something, but their GL score is 20 points lower than someone else, I would actually prefer that person with the 20-point GL score to go instead, which is why I obviously would weight that as well. So like I do like the Sheffield system, but there are always a couple of lifters at Sheffield that have no chance of winning. And I would prefer if we had, a field of 12 lifters where it could be one of 9 or 10 people who could actually win or get on the podium. That's what I would like to see. I think we're a little bit away from that just because there's obviously outliers and stuff like that. But the good thing about that is those outliers set the records in their own classes very high, and then they have to beat themselves. Unless they move weight classes, which is what we saw happen this year. The top 3 in the women, actually the whole podium moved weight classes to tackle those records that were a little bit relatively lower, which is just great strategy. So as far as how we can grow the comp and make it bigger, there's talk of going to an external venue, like hiring out a hall with some theatre seating and stuff like that. As far as the actual comp itself, like how it's going to grow is those records are all going to come up a lot, and then it's going to be a lot harder to break the records by a lot. So the top 2 in the women's did 8% more than the record, which is obviously a lot. Like that's a huge score. I don't think we'll see a score that high again, unless someone new comes out of the woodwork, or someone makes huge progress, or someone goes down a weight class and maintains a lot of their strength. Like I think those scores are going to be smaller and smaller as the competition grows, as the years go along, which is also going to mean that we're going to end up with the scores bunching a lot at the top. So there's going to be very small differences between sort of 1st and 8th, which is great because it means that each lift carries such a great significance, which we love. So I'm optimistic about that. I think the other thing that I spoke to John about this week was doing prize money down to 5th place, and that's similar for the reason that I just said there, is that we want lifters to have more options. So instead of like, oh, okay, I can't get on the podium here, I'll just go for a record. Maybe instead of that, you go for a lift to put you into 4th or 5th place instead of that. Like, it gives the lifters more options, which makes the competition a little bit more exciting. And it means there's a jostling for even more places.
Yeah, I like it. How do you go to, again, you can talk about how much you're comfortable talking about here, but what's it like coming up with this strategy for a comp based on percentage? Because that's obviously very, very different to any other comp. From what I could see I'm assuming that perhaps like Liz was your most likely to go for top place. Like, how do you plan for that? Are you looking at what you think where the others might end up? Are you setting up a day around that? How are you measuring that live? Like, are you simply looking at lifting class? Are you making your own calculators in the background? How do you approach this?
Yeah, so I had a spreadsheet which I just had to input all the lifts that were happening. So after squats, I just input all the women's squats.
Yep.
After bench, I just input all the women's bench. And then after each deadlift attempt, I input each of the deadlifts, and then it spits out the lifter's percentage. So I was just like tracking that as I went. As the competition went along, it became pretty clear that there was only like 6 of the women who could get on the podium. So I just hid the other 5 cells and I just ignored them.
Yep.
And then it was, looking at that. And it's actually exactly the same as a competition in kilos. But the way that you have to envision it is that every lifter's in the same weight class and they all weigh in exactly the same.
Yep.
There's no body weight advantages. There's no pulling for the win on body weight. You can't do that. If someone achieves the same score as you have to actually beat them. So you have to imagine that everyone weighed in the same. So when you're coaching someone who's at the start, so Liz was obviously a small lifter, lifting less weight than the bigger girls. She's obviously going towards the start of the round. It's the same thing as if you have someone lifting at the start of the round in a regular competition. Like, you've got a lifter who's got a big subtotal and they have a small deadlift. All you have to do in that scenario is maximize your total and then put the ball in the other lifter's court for them to beat you. So Liz's final deadlift attempt was 183, which put her to 108.03 points, which forced Brittany to make 205. If we had done 185, it would have forced her to do 210, I believe. But it's similar to the same thinking that when you go first, you want to actually lock in a guaranteed make and you want to put the pressure on the other person. Because if you miss, like if Liz actually missed, she would have not even been in first anymore because one of the other girls pulled before her to go into first. So Liz's pull actually put her from second into first, and then put the ball in Brittany's court to pull for the win, which she did, and she did fantastic. And then after that, Yanni, I was coaching Yanni as well, who her second deadlift at 205 was like, it was okay. I thought she had about 10 kilos left. So that's what I put in, was 215. The record standard in her weight class was 217.5. So if we took that, we get prize money for each record. And then we would have also extended the total record. So it's like a double whammy. But the catch was that we also needed 220 for third place. So I was actually like I was in 3 minds. I was like, I think she can only do 215, but 217.5 is a record attempt. Plus it extends our lead on the other 84 girls. And then the third option is 220, which puts her into third place. It also extends our lead and it also sets the record up. But I was not confident enough in 220 to load that. So we did the middle one. She nailed it. She didn't have another kilo. And then she ended up finishing fourth and beating the other 84 girls, which pushed them to do more than they could have to beat her and essentially take the total record off her. So it's the strategy doesn't change very much compared to another comp once you conceptualize the idea that everyone's lifting in the same weight class and there's no body weight advantages. I think that's the easiest way to think about it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was really well explained. You're right. Like, you're almost just using a different metric, but that once you realize you're just going by a different value, you treat it the exact same way. Makes sense.
Yeah. It's like okay, what number do I need for 108 points? Okay, I think Yanni needed like about 235 or something. I was like, okay, well, that's not happening. Well, let's see what we need for third. 220, probably too much. I think she can do 215. 217 is the record. We'll take that. So the decision making is the same. There's just that one extra element. There's like that one extra hurdle you have to get to essentially do the maths on it.
It sounds like that may have been one of them, but what was your favourite moment from the comp?
I think my favorite moment was like the stretch of deadlifts at the end for the women. Obviously, I was coaching 3 of the women in the class. Liz went 183, which put her into first place. And then there was another lifter who... Wait, hang on, who was after that? And then the next lifter actually just chipped Liz's record. So she did 183.5. That was Zin from Melbourne.
Yep.
That was exciting, and she smoked it. And then I think Brittany was after that, and she pulled for the lead. And then there was another record attempt in the 76 class, and then there was another record attempt in the 69 class by my girl Kate, which like just slipped out of her hands at lockout. And then straight after that was Yanni's 217, which was like a 10-second grinder. And then straight after that was Beth 227.5 trying to chip Yanni, and then straight after that was Izzy 234.5 trying to chip Yanni as well. So it was like 6 deadlifts in a row, just like so much action. Every single one of them was a record attempt or a placing shift, and it's just you don't get that kind of action at a regular comp, like even at a nationals. And I was explaining this to John, like. He was like, oh, maybe it's just going to be a bit like nationals. And it's like, well, nationals has 160, 180 lifters. This is the best 20. And, you know, you might get 2 out of these 20 in each session. Whereas we've got all of them in the exact same session. So it's like, nationals is exciting, but it's like the first half of the group's nowhere near winning the comp. And then there's maybe 3 or 4 lifts at the end that are meaningful to placings or records or whatever. But this was just like bang, 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 all in a row. Like 6 deadlift record attempts in a row, and you just don't get that. It was fucking cool.
Did you observe any common themes or maybe strategies from lifters? Like I listened to your preview episode, and I think you were saying, I think it was with Matt B, and you were trying to, maybe an idea was floated that people will make more lifts in these sorts of comps, or conversely, obviously, like miss a lot trying to put it all out there. What did you observe?
I think that there was a lot of missed lifts on standards, which surprised me actually. Like There was a lot of squat misses on depth. There was a lot of that was the main one actually, squat misses on depth, which doesn't tend to happen with experienced lifters, but it does tend to happen at high level meets, which I guess just is a testament to the referees upholding the standard, which I like. So I think there was a lot less made lifts in that regard, but I think the actual lifts that were completed was quite high. There was obviously some risks at the end in the women, like, you know, of those deadlifts that I mentioned, 4 of them were misses. 3 of them were misses of those 6. So there was obviously some lifters putting stuff on the line for records or for, you know, the lead or the total record or whatever. That did happen, that, you know, ended up being misses. But I think the quality of lifting, obviously because the lifters are so elite or advanced, was very, very high throughout the day. I think it was actually a bit of a mix.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
That answers it. Cool. So that was the SBD Cup. 2 Victorian lifters won. So, yeah, again, not sure if it was Vic States or SBD Cup, but...
Mate, the Victoria's always been the heartland of powerlifting because of one Lord Voldemort over there, whose name who I won't say, but he was actually like the biggest thing for growing powerlifting in Vic. So like Vic has fantastic lifters, and if we ever had like a like a state versus state thing, I think you guys would come out on top, to be honest. I think we got more participation than you guys, but I think you guys have a little bit more at the top. than we do. And we mentioned Nathan Tannis as well. He didn't come, and he probably would have won the whole thing if he did come.
Was States an APU thing?
Yeah, we abandoned it.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And there's nothing like that exists in APA?
No, but the great thing about APA is similar to USAPL actually, they allow the meet directors to have a lot more say over what goes on at their local comps. Yeah. Like obviously JP runs Team Champs, and that's become like a huge thing on the calendar. We've got our SPD Cup. There's a big meet this weekend in Newcastle, and there's a big one in Brisbane in 2 weeks, which is just kind of like giving meet directors the freedom to do what they want with their comps and like come up with interesting, cool stuff for maybe not for the lifters at the top, but maybe for that next level down to look forward to a local comp that's a little bit different to a regular local comp, or a little bit more exciting, or a little bit of production value attached to it. Like I know Team Champs, for instance, was just like, it wasn't always the lifters who were winning nationals and going to worlds and stuff who would do it. It was oftentimes the lifters just below that, like, maybe getting on the podium or getting close to a podium spot at nationals, who were looking forward to comps like that. And that's kind of what States was. It was like a way for lifters to be shown a like competitive environment outside of just nationals. So I think we'll see meet directors continue to get creative with this stuff. And I think there'll be, a couple of comps each year that are a bit different that lifters look forward to.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a good thing, because you're right. And with like APA's national qualifying standards, and they've always been good, but comparatively, like USAPL is pretty low. Nationals will be quite simply something that a lot of lifters will never get to. Even people who are in it for ages and like are still pretty good, there's a lot of people that will miss out. So I think, there's an important role for those comps and experiences just below that. So I've always spoken really, really fondly of, say, Team Champs that JP has created. Like, I feel like amongst our community in Melbourne, like the two biggest comps of the year would have to be like Team Champs and Nationals. And I know, a few of my lifters would love to just like do those two comps for the year, and that's like more than they could ask for. So it'd be interesting to see what other things sort of pop up.
We had one a few weeks ago called Power Pals, where it was a team event. It was just a 2-on-2. So you just have a partner, and one partner will lift in the A group, the other partner will lift in the B group, and you just combine GL score of the two people.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of like actual partners doing it, like boyfriend, girlfriend, actually doing the meet together. And like, I think the top two actually were both actual partners who finished top two, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's sick.
Like that, like allowing meet directors to have a bit of fun and like try something out. Hey, maybe it won't work, but also maybe it will, and maybe it will be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I did see that. I reckon that's sick, because I was thinking of things a few months ago, like how can you make comps different? And you're right, like obviously we're constrained by a competition format, but how you make that competitive and how you choose to, I guess, like score outside of that and award prizes is where like all the flexibility comes into it. And a lot of the day, people eventually get sick of just doing normal comps over and over again. Anything novel in this sport, I think, is generally pretty exciting.
Yeah, and the last federation, APU, they had an issue with one of the meet directors for trying to have an invitational session, because he wanted to essentially put all the best lifters into a prime time and have like a prime time session in the afternoon, which like, the top 20 people or whatever who signed up for the comp was put into. And he was told like a day before the comp, hey, this doesn't abide by our guidelines of having lifters compete against each other in age and weight categories. And he ignored the email, and he was actually like removed as an affiliate for breaking bylaws. So like, this is the kind of shit that like we're trying to get away from. Like, we want to actually give meet directors the ability to have freedom in running comps, but also like empower them a little bit and like make them feel like they're actually doing it for the right reasons, rather than just like, okay, boring local comp, group A, group B, like, okay, all the 74s in one group, all the 80, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, we've seen it all before, and like we can do better.
Yep. No, it sounds like from an outside perspective, APA's only been really, really positive.
It has been.
What I wanted to pick your brain on next is almost selfish in a way, but I guess like recently I've thought a lot about things that I've been learning recently that I wish I knew earlier, that I try and communicate to coaches I interact with that are younger than me or coming up. But I want to know from you, I guess, what are some lessons you've learned or things that you tell younger coaches that you think can help them quite a bit that they might not necessarily hear from others?
Okay, so I think the first one is really, really important. And I feel like a lot of new coaches actually do get this right now, almost because online coaching has been sort of a thing that's always existed for new coaches. Like most new coaches, when they get into online coaching, they've probably had an online coach before, or they've, at the very least, been aware of what that kind of system looks like or entails. But when I started online coaching, the reason I started online coaching was because I was working at a commercial gym at Fitness First, and I was 20, 21, and all of the clients who were attracted to the training style that I was using, like, strength training, powerlifting sort of esque stuff, they were all young boys, high school, bit older, uni and stuff, who had no money, and they couldn't afford $80 for a PT session or $100 for a PT session. So my first thought was like, fuck, how do I get these people to pay me? How do I help these people in a way that's not going to break their bank, or a way that they can actually agree to, paying? So I started doing what I didn't know at the time was online coaching, but I started doing online coaching. This is 2012. I didn't even know what online coaching was. I didn't even know that it was a thing. It was just me like, all right, I need to help these people, write them a program, we'll do like informal feedback. And it probably took me like 7 years after that to actually get my systems organized. Like I was just kind of doing on the fly. Like, oh, these are the programs I got to do this week. Oh, this got to give this person feedback this day. Oh, like chase people up individually. Oh, you got to pay me for the last month, whatever. I think getting your systems in line is like the number one thing that you should do before you even start, is like know what payment system you're going to use, know how you're going to track your finances and your tax, know when you're going to do your program updates, know how much feedback you're going to give your lifters, and what the timelines look like, and what different service options you have, and blah, blah, blah. Actually having a system is number one. And that's something that I fucking did not do at all. Like, oh my God, I was disorganized until like Chrissy was like, you can't work like this. You need to fucking sort your shit out. And eventually I did. And like now I'm so much more efficient with my work. I can take on 3 times the amount of clients that I would have been able to back then. So that's the first thing. Have you got a story about having shit systems at any point?
I fully agree with you. But the thing is, I think you're forced to figure that stuff out once you're busy, because I think you can get by for so long just winging it like you're describing. And I think, to be fair, I feel like I've only really sorted this out within the last year or two. And before that, I feel like, I'm always so busy, always following up X, Y, Z, when really, like, had I had everything set up properly, I would have spent half my day playing golf or something, really. I agree. I think it's hard to explain that urgency, because I guess younger coaches probably are less busy to begin with, so it doesn't seem like a real issue they need to address like right now. But yeah, I guess if you're listening to this, do address this right now, and you can create so much more free time to just help you grow even sooner.
Yeah, totally. I'm actually interested to hear one of your things that you would tell younger Alex. Do people call you Alexander?
No, you know what's funny? No one calls me Alexander, but that's my preferred name to be called.
Is it really?
Yeah, but the only people that call me Alexander are probably my parents, my Greek family, and that's about it. But I push hard, but it just doesn't stick.
You like Alexander, because I fucking hate Alexander.
Right. Who
My,
calls you Alexander? Anyone?
one person calls me Alexander, my grandma. The only person. And like, I would say less people call me Alex than call me Hayes.
Okay, everyone calls you Hayes.
Like, almost no one calls me even Alex, let alone Alexander. Like my parents call me Buddy. Like they don't even call me Alex.
There you go. A lesson, I guess, um, similar sort of thought process is organizing your time so that you have time to do the boring but important stuff. And I spoke about this recently, but I can't remember I said this on another podcast the other day. I can't remember what these hats are called, but we've got our different hats. We've got our technician hat, which is like the coaching hat when you're taking that one-on-one or you're doing your online check-in. And then there's another couple of hats that I'm going to make up the names for. But one's like the admin, finances, creating content, whatever. And the other one's the sort of like creative, forward-thinking hat.
Strategy.
That's the one. And it's so easy, I think, to get so caught up in doing all the technician stuff because you're like, oh, when I do this 45-minute PT session, it equals X dollars. When I do this check-in, it's servicing this client. Like that is my work. And you're not being paid to put these other couple of hats on, but really those other couple of hats is what it takes to run a small business, which is what we're all running. And if you're not running that business and trying to make that business grow, you are going to go nowhere. So I think my biggest lesson is allocating non-negotiable time for those other things and like not betraying that time, because I think early on I would be like, oh yeah, here's my 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon for content creation. But then I end up just start doing like check-ins or something else and not doing it.
Oh man, I'm watching basketball during those 2 hours. Like how quickly I skip doing content creation is crazy. That's why I started the podcast again, because I was like forced content creation.
Yeah.
If I want any clips or stuff for Instagram, I can just clip up 20 seconds of something that I said on the podcast. Put that up.
Yeah.
Stops me from having to do any of that stuff. And yeah, I enjoy like sitting down with someone having a shit chat. It's good.
Agreed. That's probably one of the reasons I started the potty too, because I find myself like pumping out heaps of written posts or graphics and stuff. I'm like, firstly, like to condense all the thoughts you have into like a little post sucks.
Yeah.
And second,
so much better to have the freedom to elaborate and like fully flesh out your ideas. Because like if you were to write down everything that you said in like a 5-minute spiel on a podcast, it would be like fucking 4 A4 pages.
Yeah.
No one's reading that.
Correct.
Whereas like people happily listen to long form content. And, like I have people all the time like, oh man, this podcast was only 45 minutes this week. Like I wanted an hour. I wanted an hour 15. And like people have a massive appetite for long form content, and it's because they do it while they're doing other shit. Whereas if you go on Instagram and someone hasn't caught your eye in the first 3 seconds of looking at your post, they're just going to scroll down to the next thing and just never read it. So like, I reckon long form content's where it's at. It's just harder to get the eyeballs initially because like it's a big time investment to go like, oh fuck, this is a 75-minute podcast. Maybe I won't. But
yeah. I just try and not think about. I'm just like, so I do have a co-host in like half my episodes, and I said to her early on, what's that?
I've listened to a few eps.
Big fan.
Yeah, you guys have a good rapport. I like it.
Good.
She seems cool.
She's very cool. But I said to her at the start, like, we're just going to do this to like for the next X weeks until December something before a holiday. Like no matter what happens, we're just going to stick to it and keep on pumping it out. Because if you get too caught up in like how many views or how many listens things are getting, you can be, I guess, discouraging in a way. But like you got to remember the people that are listening are getting a bit out of it. Do you have
People message me like on Monday morning, like, "Oh, I wanted
yeah.
the podcast yesterday while I was on the train." And I'm like, "Ah, sorry, it's a bit late today."
That happened this Monday to me too, because the Nationals I didn't upload anything beforehand. So people let you know. You ruin their routine.
Yeah, we used to get like every week weekly weights come out on Friday 9 a.m.
Yeah.
and we would get like 10 people tagging us in their story every single Friday, being like, "Fucking the boy, listen to the boys again on a Friday." And like, fuck, such a good feeling.
Any more lessons you might have for?
Yeah, so this one kind of comes back to what I was talking about before about athlete psychology, but it's almost like how we get to understanding the person is the concept of like we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. It's like we should be doing double the amount of listening as we should be talking. And I think that's even like magnified further when we're chatting to our clients. Like we should be allowing them to tell us how they're feeling, allowing them to elaborate, allowing them to tell us what they're liking and not liking, and what direction they think things should go, and what decisions they think we should make. And we should be listening to that a lot more than we should be telling them or explaining things to them or telling them what we think and blah blah blah. I think that's so important, and I don't think you ever get to the sort of view that I've gotten to now with understanding how important that psychology can be to getting someone forward and getting all that buy-in and all that stuff I spoke about earlier. You don't get to that point without having this approach of like actually listening and caring.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Do you think that? Yeah, where do you think? Do you think that's something that comes from more confidence as a coach? Like, I suspect maybe when you're less experienced, do coaches, do you think maybe want to feel like they're more in control? Do they just not understand? Is it from a lack of understanding? Where do you think like um, initial thoughts would lie for younger coaches who may not have that understanding yet?
I think it's both the things that you said.
Yeah.
It's control. It's that coach wanting to show the client how much they know. But then there's that other saying, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, which I think is like super fucking important. Is you can't get someone to buy into your process unless they know that you actually care about them. And you can't earn that trust without actually earning it. Like you have to actually earn it. So I think there's a lot of that in young coaches. They want to come off as all knowing, and they want to impress their clients with this information that they have from this textbook they read or this long course they did or whatever. Um, and then I think the other one, what was the other one that you said?
Wanting to be in control and
Oh, not knowing any better. Yeah,
uh,
they're unaware of the impact that psychology can have. Like it's that biopsychosocial model. It's like that. It covers such a big part of the experience, um, and it takes a while to actually understand that and know it. So I think you almost have to experience it to recognize the magnitude that it has.
do you find that as people get more experienced as a trainee, um, they are having more and more input? Like, is that a pretty linear correlation between like level of advancement and how much your lifters are wanting to suggest things or how they're giving you feedback? Is it pretty predictable like that, or do you have really advanced people that are still, I guess, letting you really call all the shots, and that's not necessarily how they operate?
I think it's a personality thing more than
Okay.
anything else, and I think that's the thing that you have to learn as the coach is the person's personality, because there's going to be beginner lifters who don't know anything, but they can still tell you stuff that might be useful. Like they can still tell you, "Hey, I'm not feeling XY muscle while I'm doing this exercise," and that could give you a clue about, okay, maybe this is the wrong exercise, or maybe the execution isn't right. Maybe I should have a closer look at something in that. That can give you as much information as anything else. Like even though they're not really aware of the information that they're giving you, um, like the three women who I had competing at the SPD Cup, like probably the three best lifters that I coach, they all let me call 99% of the shots. Like Liz Craven is fucking unbelievable. She's been going to Worlds since 2015 or whatever, 2014. And, it's actually like pretty crazy that she trusts me as much as she does. Like it's a very cool experience to be able to help her how I have. But she'll tell me like, hey, I know that when I cut weight, this is what she told me leading into comp, because she cut down a whole weight class for this comp. I know that when I cut weight, I need to feel out my leverages more. So I want to add in pause deadlifts and pause squats on my primary day, on my secondary day, sorry. And I said to her, I don't think this makes a huge physiological sense. So what we'll do is we'll do one set before your working sets on your secondary day of pause work. And she was like, cool. And then we kind of met in the middle, and that was it. And that's the only time in almost a whole year of coaching her that she's even had a suggestion.
Yep.
Whereas like Yanni as well, like Yanni doesn't say anything other than like, I'm way too overweight and need to cut too much weight, or my back hurts. Those are the only things I get out of Yanni. So it's like, even the lifters at the top who are really, really aware of what's going on, they might not necessarily be wanting to be behind the wheel and making decisions. But then other lifters who are at the top may well want to be. And that's not, I don't think, to do with their experience level. I think it's more to do with their personality.
How would you describe then the personality of someone who wants a lot more say in things, or has a lot more to share?
I think it might be coming from like a place of wanting to have control. And like, I know that this is the case with me and my coach. Like I give quite a lot of input, and almost to the point where at times Matt will be like, hey dude, that's enough. Like you're giving me too much input. And I'm like, sorry, I've overstepped the line. Like we have a very clear like back and forth. And he'll tell me, hey, like this idea I don't like, this one I do, we'll run with this one. And he'll give me an explanation why. And I think for me, like I am quite controlling because I like to be able to control my own clients' decision making, but I also like to get that back and forth. And I like to understand what's going on in my client's head when I write the program, so that I know kind of what they're expecting. And that's, I think, why that I like to give the amount of feedback that I give. But like, yeah, I'm not too sure. It could come from a place of like wanting to control things a little bit, like be in control, or be able to think ahead and plan. I don't know. Do you have any experience with this?
I guess only my own, because I'm, I guess, similar to you. I really like, and to be honest, I've self-coached now for a couple of years. But because I really like to, it comes from a place of really wanting a lot of buy-in to everything I'm doing.
Yes.
And, in previous times when I've set out to work with the coach, I've like acknowledged that, okay, that's a period of time where I have to be hands off, and maybe it's played a different role in a different part of life. But I think it comes down to just really wanting to enjoy things. And I personally find like the more I've trained, all the things you described a bit earlier, it's like, I know which exercises I'm going to like I know which exercises are going to keep me feeling healthy over the course of X period of time. I would rather go straight to that than waste time. I think that's my personal downfall. I'm not saying that's an amazing thing by any means. That's probably the reason.
Yeah. So for me, I know that like I do a lot better in my training when I have my head down and I'm actually not thinking.
Okay.
But I'm only able to get into that mindset in training if I'm happy with that, what's actually written on the paper. So it's almost like before the block, we do a bit of a discussion to plan like, okay, what's this going to look like? And then if an idea that I have gets knocked back by Matt, I know why, so I'm able to buy into it. And then when the block actually starts, I'm able to get my head down and get stuck in. So it's almost like we have periods of work, and then we have periods of reflection, and then we have ideas, and then we have sort of like clarification on ideas, and then a new block develops, and then we get back to the working phase again. So it's like it almost comes in waves for the way that Matt and I work our coaching relationship out, and that's kind of what I will encourage my lifters to do as well. Is like end of the block, I'll ask them a few questions. Hey, where do you think we should take the next block? What would you like to substitute in and out? What do you think's working? What do you think could work better? How do you think we could do that? Those kind of questions, and then I get a couple of answers back from them, and I can go, okay, I agree with this, I don't agree with this, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. Here's your next program with those two changes. And I think that works to get that buy-in, because they feel like they've been listened to, but they also feel like I'm the one still calling the shots if I'm able to say, hey, this idea I don't quite like, and here's why.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think you need to
finding that. Sorry, you go.
Yeah, no, you need to be able to give people that opportunity to have their 2 cents, and obviously end of block's a really good time. And you're right, if you can iron that out before the training block even starts, then again it comes back to your whole theme of the psychology coming into training.
Yeah, and I think as coaches, like, we still need to be showing our clients that we're the ones who are in charge, per se, like at least somewhat. So we can't just go, oh, love that idea, even if we don't love that idea, I'll just give you the program that you want, because that's not really what coaching is. They hired you to make those tough decisions and help them get where they want to go. But it's realizing the stuff that's compulsory, as I said before, and then realizing which stuff can be tinkered with, how it can be tinkered with, and then, you know, getting things moving forward, how we can actually sort of gel those two things together.
Yeah, no, I love it. Any more lessons, or was that it for that?
I had one more. So this is something that I learned as an athlete, was actually being patient. We spoke about this a little earlier, in that, like, when it's time to hit the go button, you fucking hit the go button. But I think being impatient as an athlete can impact decision making, and I think it can, if you have too much of a short-term lens on certain things, it can impact the decision that you make, and actually alter your trajectory in the long term a little bit. So, like, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot a little bit by trying to go for something in the short term that doesn't line up with the long term values. And the biggest example I've got of this is, when I actually started training for powerlifting, I was about 80 kilos body weight. I decided to cut to the 74 class and ended up spending 2 years in the 74 class for no fucking reason at all, other than I wanted to be a little bit more competitive in the very short term. But I imagine that if I had that 2 year period differently and actually grew into it a little bit better, I'd probably be a little bit further along now than I am. So I think, like, having the ability to have a long-term view, but then also be able to zoom in on the short term and realize, like, okay, this block leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to this. And then if I zoom out, I've accomplished this much. I think that's really important, and something that I wish I had. I knew this at the time, but I was too short-sighted to actually do anything about it. Like, I was going against what my coach was telling me to do in that time for those short-term goals.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I put up a question box a couple of days ago to, like, usually these don't spit out the best questions, but we've got some to punch through.
It's really disappointing, the level of questions that I get on mine as well. It's 90% trolling. I hate it.
Favorite question: why does Alex still bench less than me? From Dennis.
So Dennis is actually really good at bench, and I'm actually really not. So, I mean, that explains it, doesn't it?
It's true.
I mean, the serious answer is he's fucking jacked as hell, and I'm less jacked. And, I've been powerlifting with a torn labrum for 10 years, so that probably held me back a little bit.
Oh, you don't want to tell him that he has 2 torn labrums.
I actually knew that.
Okay.
I don't know. He somehow got super jacked and juicy with the torn labrum, so I don't know. Do we start the steroid allegations on here?
No, thanks. It's not good for my coaching reputation.
If he was on steroids, he'd be able to deadlift a bit better. So he's
he'll save that clip and watch it before deadlifting for the next year. What do you deadlift? Are you close to 300 yet?
I did 300 at home, yeah.
What's that?
I did 300 in my garage a few months ago.
Sounds like a good comp.
Yeah, garage comp. It was actually an unplanned training day, and I jumped straight from 260 to 300.
An unplanned training day?
It was an unplanned attempt, just on a regular training day.
Yeah.
I had 2 singles at 260. I did both of them, and then I watched the second one back, and I was like, I reckon I can do 300. And then I just put it on and did it. Like, I didn't do another warm-up in between. I just went straight to 300 and did it.
What was the most you'd pulled before that attempt?
290 I've done a couple times before that.
You ever what jumps would you take in comp from second to third on deads, ideally?
So at my last comp, I actually attempted 300 and missed. Yeah. I did 255, 282 and a half, 300.
Okay. Should have gone straight to 300.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm not sure if you have to speak on behalf of John and Greta here as part of this question, but how did the idea for the SBD Cup become a reality? Like, was there a first seed of thought that led to it all?
So John and Greta actually went to Sheffield earlier this year.
Oh, really?
Because they're the obviously the exclusive SBD distributors in Australia. SBD is who runs Sheffield. It's fully run by SBD. They're the meet directors. So they actually flew in all of the distributors worldwide to Sheffield for the comp, and then they had an SBD conference for a couple of days before or after. I'm not sure. So they were there for it. They kind of saw it up close. They were sitting in the crowd. So I think that's what got John first thinking about it. When they opened the gym in 2016, they used to run what was called the City Strength Cup at the end of the year, which was like an anniversary comp every November. That's when they opened the gym. Every November, they'd have a prize money comp, which was just like on dot score or Wilk score or whatever, where they'd give money away to the winners. So John wanted to kind of take that comp, bring it back, but make it like Australian Sheffield. So that was kind of the vision, was to take that prize money comp that they had, annually going on. Obviously, there was a couple of years where they didn't have it with COVID, and then we moved to the gym in Alexandria. We're in a new facility now, and we hadn't run any comps until this year. So they wanted to bring back the SBD Cup, but they also wanted to do something more different. And yeah, that being there at Sheffield actually sparked the idea. What was the second part of the question?
No, you basically answered it, but I've got an interesting follow-up question. Do you think SBD Cup in Australia can get to the point where it's a more highly anticipated comp than nationals?
I think it will be always the most watched individual session,
yeah,
because it's the best lifters all in one place. But from a hype perspective, adding in the amount of depth that you can at a national event, adds so many more storylines, particularly with how many good lifters we've got in Australia now and how much depth there is in so many weight classes. There's 6 guys who could legitimately win the 105s. There's there's 2 really, really top level lifters in the 83s going one-on-one. The 84s has 3 going head to head. There's a whole bunch of other classes with 3, 4, 5 lifters who could win. So I think just the amount of storylines that you can get in the one place probably makes nationals better in totality. But as far as one session goes, you're essentially picking the 24 best lifters from nationals and putting them in one session later in the year. And it, like I said before, having those 6 female deadlifts in a row that were all record attempts, you don't get that at nationals. You just can't get that unless the record's just really low for whatever reason. And that's kind of the other reason that makes this comp so good, is it brings the records up, and it means that there's actually more meaning to having a national record now, which I think is something that hasn't really been the case in Australia in the past because we've got so many fucking federations and everyone's kind of split up. Um, hopefully this is the kind of thing that helps to unify drug tested powerlifting in Australia again, because I feel like we haven't had that since 2017, since the IPF got removed from, sorry, Australia got removed from the IPF at the end of 2017. We haven't had this much competition in one place, and I think hopefully Melbourne coming over next year will add to that. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about the future of the APA and drug tested powerlifting.
Are there any leftover standard records still standing
After the meet?
Yeah.
It's a good question, actually. I don't think anyone broke the 93 or 105 kilo bench records.
Okay.
So I'm fairly sure the 93 is 192.5 and the 105 is 205. I also think there's a couple in the super heavyweight men's that haven't been broken yet either. But of the lifts that actually occurred on the weekend, there was 24 records broken. Out of, I think, 40 potential records that could have been broken with the amount of weight classes that were represented. I might have to double check. Yeah, there was 10 weight classes represented. So that's 40 records, and 24 out of those 40 were broken.
Do you think you see people do what people do in Sheffield from Worlds into Sheffield, where they might not necessarily extend a record if they don't have to, knowing that they'll likely want to do like SPD Cup and do it there?
I think less so for us because the lifters that we have going to Worlds aren't winning easily enough. Like we didn't have anyone on the podium. We haven't had a lifter on an open podium since Liz Craven in 2017 or 16. That's the last lifter and the only lifter we've ever had actually win an overall medal. And we only really see this from lifters who are first at Worlds, and first by enough that they can actually sandbag a little bit and then save it for Sheffield. So I don't think that we'll see this because our lifters that are going to Worlds are going to have to maximize their total for their placing, and also at Nationals they're going to have to maximize their total in order to win. We might see it in like a certain case if there's a lifter who's miles ahead of the pack at Nationals and then isn't intending on going to Worlds. We might see them just take out Nationals by whatever they need to, save it a little bit, and then go into SPD Cup and give themselves a better chance. But I think that's probably the only time where we could get that to happen.
Yeah. Who's your... I was chatting to a New South Wales acquaintance, and she was telling me about some local legends on the scene in powerlifting meets, and she wanted to know who your favourite, or who the best lifter out of Jeffrey or Gav was.
Who sent this in? Was this Beck Chambers? Yeah. I knew it was Beck. I always talk to Beck about these two guys. I think Gav shits all over Jeffrey.
Wow.
And I think that's actually a pretty hot take because Jeffrey comes in and he's just happy and smiley, and Gav's a bit more rugged and aggressive. But I'm all in on Gav. I love Gav. He told me once at a comp that he wants to compete every 6 weeks, so he can do a comp and then he can have a full week off.
Yeah.
And then he can train for 4 weeks and then have a full week off and do the next comp. And that's what he does. He does like 4 weeks of training between each comp with a week off on either side. And that's his like ideal setup, to do a comp every 6 weeks.
I love that.
Whereas like Jeffrey's a nice guy, but I kind of got over his shtick quite quickly. I said this to Beck and she was like so upset with me because she loves Jeffrey. But yeah, I got over his shtick quite quickly.
That's funny. If you could change one rule in powerlifting, what would it be?
Okay, this is so easy because powerlifting comps take way too long. and people are really shit with just setting up that, like, using setups that don't actually help them at all. Like some of the, particularly in bench, some of the shit that we see in bench, or like people coming out and fucking doing this shit, and just like just general nonsense that I hate. I would make this 60-second clock 30 seconds.
Interesting. What about 2 attempts instead of 3?
I like 2 attempts instead of three. The only issue with that is if you miss your opener, particularly in deadlift, you're kind of fucked.
Oh.
One idea that JP had was actually unlimited attempts. Like you can just keep taking attempts.
Yeah.
But obviously people drop out of the group. So like, most people take 3 attempts and then half the group disappears, and then, 4 of them take 4 attempts and then 2 more disappear. And you can just keep going if you want, but you're lifting on your own.
Yeah.
And I reckon that's fucking stupid as well. Then powerlifting comps would just be way too long. But yeah, I reckon 30 seconds. Like if you go to a meet and you see someone like with an efficient setup and the referee says start or squat, or they start their deadlift, there's always more than 30 seconds on the clock.
Yeah.
Like unless you have to replace the bar.
So I've during a session, I don't know, watching the first session, then coach the second session, some random comp, and you know how like the general recommendation to time your warm-ups is like a minute per lifter? I don't know if you've heard that. So I sat there and just timed a session, a group, and it was like 41 seconds per lifter.
That's including loading the bar?
From between each time they said load, the bar's loaded.
Yeah, that's actually quite quick. That would be slower for bench.
Fair. I can't remember what
Like-
it was for. Yeah.
Like it's usually deadlift the fastest, then squat, then bench, because in bench they have to change the
Rack.
safeties and rack height.
Yeah.
And load, and they also, a lot of people will come out and explain their hand out for 8 seconds. Whereas in deadlift, it's just people come out, no one fucks around really on deadlift. Like most people go with 40 seconds on the clock, and it's much easier to load the bar.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I reckon 30 seconds for everyone.
I like it.
Except for like equipped lifting, because that's a different beast.
My go-to is just kilo increments.
1 kilo.
Yeah. Do you know why? I was chatting about this on the live stream the other day with during Nats. Do you know why we've got default 2.5 kilo increments?
I don't know why. I just assume that it's because that's what the average gym plate is.
Yeah.
Like that's just what the average setup at the gym is, where there's 1.25s and that's no smaller plates.
Yeah, it makes sense. Would you prefer 1 kilo increments?
I liked the 1 kilo increments when we were in world powerlifting for a bit.
Yeah.
I actually really liked it. But now I look back on it, like on my open powerlifting page, and I'm like, oh, that comp I squatted 239. It just looks so stupid. So I actually like 2.5. The reason I don't like 2.5 is for women's bench press, because you end up like you don't even need attempt cards. Like if your lifter benches 50 and they make it, you don't even have to hand in an attempt card. That you just get bumped to the next 2.5. That's what you were going to do anyway. Like I did that on the weekend. I just didn't even put in attempt cards to the tech test for my girls who were competing in the morning session.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you can't do like 1 kilo for bench and then 2.5 for deadlift and squat. Like that doesn't make sense. It has to be uniform across the comp. But yeah, I don't know. I don't mind, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't mind. But powerlifting comps are too long, and 30 seconds would be heaps better.
I like it. I haven't heard that before, but I will.
Yeah, next comp you go to, tell me I'm wrong. Like just tell me I'm wrong, because I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
People will hate it initially. It'll just be like any rule change. Like people will whinge about it, and then everyone will adapt and realize that it's actually good.
Yep. I'd agree with you. Final question. Answer this how you want. Who's your favorite powerlifter?
I'm really not that interested in powerlifting outside of work.
Yeah.
Um, and I used to be really, really into it, but I've found that it took away my love for it a little bit if I was just consuming powerlifting content all the time. Like, I don't really listen to powerlifting podcasts. Like, I much prefer listening to the parts of your podcast where you're not talking about training,
Yep.
like just talking about just random shit. Like, I much prefer listening to that than I do listening to powerlifting content. So it's kind of hard for me I don't really know if I even have one. I want to hear yours, and then maybe it will spark something in me.
No, I was gonna. When I said you can answer this how you want to, it's because my answer to this is a guy I met on the weekend, coached by Didier. His name's John. He, um, I'm not too quite sure how old he is, but he was there having a great time. I was putting on like the music in the warm up room, and he was just vibing, having a great time. He was like the kindest person of all time, and he's my favorite powerlifter now.
Yeah, I mean, like, I much prefer to see regular people
Yeah.
achieve cool things or just like improve than I do to like follow a particular powerlifter and watch them win Sheffield or anything like that. Like, I don't know what it is about powerlifting, but like I've never really found that following the individual person is cool. Like, I will watch a high level competition and I'll kind of just be cheering for everyone to do well. I won't really have someone who I like more. Um, like, I follow basketball really closely, rugby league really closely, and like I'm much more of a fan in those sports than I am in powerlifting. Where powerlifting, I'm kind of like invested in it for work, and like it doesn't really fill up very much for me outside of that, because I think if it did, and it used to, then it ends up taking away from my training. It ends up taking away from my enjoyment and my actual desire to do my work, because it's like, oh, I spent 5 hours coaching powerlifting today, and then now I'm going to go home and watch powerlifting highlights. Like, I don't have the appetite for that anymore.
Yeah. No, look,
I really like Jesus Oliveros though, because like there's nothing cooler than just a huge dude walking out 500 kilos. Like, that's the coolest shit to me, is like the enormous squats from the real big dudes. So I think if I had to answer, I'd probably say Jesus. And I love Ray Williams, and I wish he would come back and beat Jesus, but I don't think it's going to happen. Absolutely love Ray Williams.
I'm pretty similar. Like, I'm pretty disconnected from it, but I think it's pretty cool. I feel like nowadays, especially with like Sheffield being one of the vehicles, it's like you can be a fan of people. It's like because of all the media and like the backstories and their YouTube and just like how it's all how all this like content's being created around it. Like, you can tune into Sheffield, and I know a lot of people don't watch him, but like Panna is someone that's, you know, in a lot of people's feeds over the last like 5 years, and you sort of, there's a lot more background information about these lifters on the biggest platforms. And I think that's a pretty cool thing about the sport these days, I guess, versus the past.
Yeah.
But you're right. I hate the idea of following, like having my feed full of powerlifting. Because I think for the everyday sort of lifter who maybe isn't necessarily in the industry, all of a sudden I think your perception of what's good completely changes and skews. And if you're always surrounded by, these insane lifts, if that's something that changes your perception of your own lifting and your own progress, then it's a recipe for disaster. But look, all in all, I think a good thing for the sport, just the way it's going.
Yeah, like Evie Corrigan came into the gym a couple of weeks ago from New Zealand, and obviously she won the first Sheffield, and she's like, everyone loves Evie Corrigan, and I know Evie, like I've spoken to her online a bit, asked her to come in and do the podcast. She's like, yeah, cool. And the number of people who came up to me were like, oh my god, you're doing a podcast with Evie Corrigan, like that's so cool, like are you nervous? I'm like, no, she's just a person who's really strong. Like, I had zero like I don't know, starstruckness or whatever that word would be, like absolutely zero, because like I don't know, like I'm invested in powerlifting in the way that like I can kind of rub shoulders with these people at the top in a way. Like, you know, SPD Cup's a good example. Like, I coached 3 of the women in it. I knew every single person lifting like well enough to like, go out to dinner with them and say hello and have a beer with them. So they're not really like people who I put on a pedestal. I just like them as people. Um, and I think that makes it different from like following LeBron James or something, because that's like actually a celebrity who I'll never come into contact with in my life. Um, so yeah, it's just like kind of like it's a different level for me.
Yeah, fair. That's us for everything.
I have a question for you, and I don't know if you've already answered this on like a recent pod or something, but what's the PBs and pints event, and how do I come?
So basically, I was trying to figure out how to make my own max out day and not call it max out day or lifting day or something boring. So I jumped into, and the idea was always to go to the pub afterwards. So I jump into ChatGPT and I'm like, give me a name. And it was like, one of them in the list of like 20 was like PRs and pints. A quick question, do you say PBs or PRs?
I think I would say PR, but
Really?
PB is not wrong.
I thought PR may have been American, but I hadn't confirmed that, hence why I asked you.
I think I see people say PR more than they say PB, but I don't care. I don't really care.
Fair. Oh, I just remembered one more question someone asked. Beck also asked me to ask you, which was, when did you become like angry man yelling at cloud?
Um, Probably when I was like 25, which is way too young to be angry man yelling at cloud. Um, I I get really annoyed by incompetence, and I get really annoyed by like by, by like dickheadisms, um, and I kind of always have.
Yeah.
So um, I don't know. I'm just like a pretty chill person. So like when anyone does something that's like reverse of chill, or like gets in the way of being chill, then it annoys me. So I think like it stemmed from that. So I don't know. Maybe even earlier than 25. I don't know.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, anyway,
But
PBs
yes,
and pints, just a big fun training day, and then hit the pub afterwards. November, it's next weekend, so hey, if you want to come down, you're more than welcome to. But next year, it's going on tour.
fuck yeah.
I think mainly that just means me like rocking up to random gyms interstate and seeing who wants to go for a beer afterwards. I think that's what it's going to sort of be. But hey, if it gets massive by then, it could be good.
Well, we can do one at gym here, and then we can do a potty in this room right after, and we can drink beers while we do the potty.
I'm down. I'm down.
What's your favorite beer?
I don't know how you're going to feel about this. My go-to would be a Stone and Wood.
Beautiful.
But if there's a pub that has the Tank Carlton, I'll have that.
I don't think I've even had that. I don't think I've ever seen that. What's a tank
Like
Carlton?
the fresh beer in the tank, the big brass tanks.
Oh, you mean a keg?
No, some pubs will have like, I don't know actually how to describe this. So sorry if you're listening and you're pulling your hair out. But I think it's called like, is it pasteurized, or when the beer's like delivered and it's for some reason it's fresher, and you'll see on this big tank like above the bar, it'll say the date that it was brought in. It'll be written there, and then you'll notice like at the pub there'll be a like special. Not every pub has it. There'll be like a special tap for that Carlton, and it'll look different to the rest of it. It's like fresher.
I've never heard of this before. But you know what shits me about Melbourne is that you guys don't have schooners,
Not everywhere.
because the schooner is
Perfect
the
size.
best beer vessel possible.
Wait, it's what?
The schooner is the best beer vessel invented.
100%.
It's the best size, especially in summer when it gets too hot. Like if you have a pint and you're not absolutely pounding beers,
Yeah.
it's warm by the time you get to the bottom third. If you're in the sun in Australia, like you need that schooner.
Couldn't agree more.
I actually think another maybe potentially hot take. Pints are shit, and I'll take a schooner any day.
That's a good hot take.
The only thing good about a pint. I mean, obviously they're bigger, so more beer, but like it's a bit cheaper. It works out a bit cheaper.
How much do you pay for a pint there?
Like 14, 15 bucks.
Yeah, I reckon we're like 15 to 17.
I haven't been to a pub in a while, to be honest. It's kind of hard with dad life.
How's dad life going?
It's great. It's fucking awesome,
Yeah.
but I don't have any free time. And I think like that's the thing that do you want to have kids?
Yep.
That's the thing you'll realize when you have kids is how much time you used to waste and how much time you had before. Like I thought I was busy beforehand, and now I do more coaching than I did before kids, plus all of the stuff that I do with the kids and for the kids. And I still have a little bit of free time, whereas I didn't think I had any free time before that.
Yeah.
So mate, it's great. There's actually nothing cooler than watching your kids like learn new stuff, and like my daughter's 2.5, so her language is growing at like a crazy rate. So she'll say like a new word or a new phrase like almost every day. Chris and I will look at each other like, fuck, this kid is just like unbelievable. But I'm sure every kid's exactly the same. But it's very cool watching them like noticeably improve at stuff every week. Very cool.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to that one day.
Highly recommend.
All right, where can people find you? And you've got your coaching page as well.
So Alex Hayes _process on Instagram. That's probably the best place to find me. Business page is the Process PL, which I don't really use. I need to get back to posting on there. And you can find my podcast called Lift Talk with 1T, LIFTALK, on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, go give me a 5-star rating, like, subscribe, all the good stuff.
Do you hear Jamie Smith reckons it's the stars do nothing?
I think what the stars do is give you a reputation for when people who don't know you like click on your page. They go, oh, they've got 1,000 reviews, average of 4.8 stars or whatever. Like it gives you like a bit of proof of concept, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, fair.
But I think that likes and comments and stuff on YouTube actually do stuff. Like I think it puts you in the algorithm more.
Right.
But I don't think it does on Spotify.
Yeah, I don't know where people... You know when you go on the Spotify stats and it's like, it's reached this many people. Where are people seeing that on Spotify?
I have no idea. I don't look at any of that stuff.
Anyway, thank you for your time. That was great. Again, I feel like all I've learned is that we're really similar people. So I feel like this won't be the last time we chat like this. Thank you for coming on.
Mate, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.